In this video, we're going to be taking a look at support and resistance. Now, this is going to be an introductory video for many of you, and we're going to be going over what exactly support and resistance is from a conceptual standpoint, and then we're going to be moving forward and taking a look at what it actually looks like in a real financial market, how you can spot it, mark it up, and then use it to trade. And this is going to be an introductory video for the entire series of videos on support and resistance. Now, I've got us pulled up on EuroJPY, but before I can take you all into the actual market, we have to take a look at what support and resistance is from a conceptual standpoint. So I'm going to pull us out of the market for a second so that we can take a look at that. All right, so I want you to imagine that you are in a hallway. So here is our hallway right here. All right, we have our floor right here. And then we have our ceiling right here. All right, so we're walking down this hallway, and I want you to imagine that you're bouncing a bouncy ball down the hallway. Okay, now I want you to imagine that you bounce this ball against the ground as hard as you can. So you throw the ball at the floor. When the ball hits the floor, what is the ball going to do? Of course, it's going to bounce up, and because you bounced it really hard, it's going to bounce up all the way to the ceiling. Now the ceiling is stronger than the ball, and what's going to happen is when the ball hits the ceiling is going to repel the ball all the way back down to the floor. And if you bounce the ball hard enough, it's going to keep going back and forth until the end of the hallway. So imagine that there is an open door right here at the end of the hallway. And when the ball reaches the end of the hallway, it bounces right out the door. And because there's nothing left to repel it, it bounces right on up past the ceiling and continues on to the upside. This analogy of you walking down a hallway and bouncing a bouncy ball against the floor and the ceiling is synonymous with how price moves in the financial markets between support and resistance. So what we're going to do now is we're going to change the word floor to support. And we're going to change the word ceiling to resistance. And what we've got now is price moving in between support in the market and resistance in the market. So what happens is price will come down to a level that has historically acted as support that price then bounces from all the way up until it finds a level that price has historically rejected from. It's been held at. And then from there, price moves back to support, and thus you have the saga in the financial markets where price is consistently and always moving between some kind of support or resistance at all times. So if you can understand this conceptually, it's going to help you tremendously on your trading journey to understand that at any given time in the financial market, no matter what pair you have pulled up, no matter what day it is, what time frame it is, what you're doing, price is moving between some kind of support or resistance. Now, there are a lot of different kinds and categories of support and resistance. In this series specifically, we're taking a look at horizontal support and resistance. But what we're going to see at a later time is that there are many different types. So just to clarify, in this video, we're looking at horizontal support and resistance. And when we say support, what we're talking about is a level in the market that has historically supported price. And when we talk about resistance, what we're talking about specifically is a level in the market which has historically rejected price or pushed price down. So this is fundamentally what support and resistance is. Now let's go back into the market and see if we can identify real support and resistance in action. All right, so now we're back on Euro JPY. We're going to look at applying that information to the real charts. So let's start off over here on the left-hand side of the chart and take a look. Do you notice how over here we have a peak in the market? So we were rising over here all the way up into this area, and then we began to fall. That's a peak in the market. Price came up to this point and rejected several times. So let's get rid of this. Let's circle this area here. And then let's make note of this right in here. All right, this was some kind of resistance over here. Now we continued down at that point. So once we found our resistance here, we continued down. And from this point right here, we had a valley in the market. Price rose from here. It did a few things in the meantime. It came back down to this same spot, rose back up, came back down to the same spot, rose back up all the way to our resistance right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to note this valley right here where price found support. We're going to note this valley right here where price found support. We're going to note this valley right here where price found support. And we're going to get rid of this. And we're going to add another line down here. Now notice that price found support once, twice, 3 times. Okay, so what we've got down here is a support. All right, and we will put this here, put this over here, and pull this over here. All right, this is our support line down here. All right, and I want you guys to ignore everything to the left of this for just a moment. We're going to get back to this in just a moment. Focus on these circles and understand the concept here, just a simple concept of support and resistance. And over here, where we found resistance, and it's one big circle, but really, if you look, there's 3 arrows here. We bounced once, twice, 3 times, 4 times actually, 5 times. There's a lot of instances in here of resistance. So we're going to now call this our resistance. Okay, so often here we've got our hallway here, our 2 blue lines. That's our hallway. We've got our bouncy ball right here, and what's the bouncy ball doing? Comes up to the resistance, comes down to the support, comes up to the resistance, comes down to the support, comes back up to the resistance, comes down to support, comes back up to the resistance, etc. Just like we had talked about before. Price is simply moving between this resistance formed here and the support formed over here. And so sure enough, over here on the right-hand side, when we come back up to our resistance level, what does price do? Of course, it falls from the ceiling back down to the floor, just like that. And then, of course, once we're at our support, what does price do? Finds support, continues to rise from this area all the way back up to our resistance over here on the right-hand side. Okay? There we go. Right there. Okay. So this is a basic understanding of what support and resistance actually looks like in the market. Now, I want to take us back out of the market for a minute to explain some more details about support and resistance that will help us in understanding how they actually work and how we can use them and identify them in the real markets before we carry on here. All right, so we're back over here at our conceptual example where we've got price moving in between support and resistance in the markets. And what we're going to talk about now, some characteristics of support and resistance. So, characteristics of support and resistance. So the first thing that you need to understand is that support and resistance are not actually different. They're actually the same. The only difference between a support or resistance is actually just simply where price is. Because, and this is important, so make sure you take note of this, when support breaks, it becomes resistance. 2, when resistance breaks, it becomes support. Okay, now what does that mean exactly? So let's come back to our conceptual example. Price was moving in between our boundaries, in between our floor and our ceiling, in between our support and our resistance. But then at the end of the hallway, when the door was open, there was nothing left to push the ball down, and so it bounced straight through and above the ceiling, made a higher high. Once price breaches a resistance, so when this breach takes place right here, this level right here is no longer acting as a resistance. Now what's going to happen is that it's actually going to act as a support. Because now that price has breached the resistance and is now above the resistance, price will come back down and it will act as support. And a new resistance will form somewhere up above somewhere else. And so we will end up with different boundaries now, like so. This is how it works. So let's go back. Now, similarly, when price breaches a support and is now beneath the support, that support is now going to act as resistance. So we will end up forming a new support, and our old support will now actually become our resistance. So when we talk about support and resistance, we're not talking about support or resistance. We're talking about support and resistance, because in all actuality, this support down here is a support and a resistance. This resistance up here is a support and a resistance. The only thing that determines whether the support or resistance, or in short, S&R, that's what many traders refer to support and resistance as S&R. The only thing that determines whether an S&R is acting as a support or resistance is simply just noting where price is relative to your S&R. So it's pretty simple. If we go back to our original hallway example, if we take price and we move it over here, this support and resistance level right here will be support. Also, this support and resistance level down here will be support because it is also beneath price. So when price breaches this support is still beneath it. It can still find support here. However, if price is in the middle, this support and resistance level is support. This level is now resistance. And if price is down here, this support and resistance level is resistance, as well as this support and resistance level. They are both resistances. They are both above price. Price may come up, find resistance. If it breaks through it, it will come up and find resistance. They are both acting as resistance because they are both above price. Now, there is one other important thing that you need to understand about support and resistance, which is that support, and we're going to call it SNR for shorthand, and you're going to hear that a lot moving through the rest of the material in the education platform, is a zone, not a solid line. Often depicted as a solid line, though you must understand conceptually it is actually a zone. And we're not going to get too far into that in this video specifically, because we're going to save that for a different video to really detail that out, but still worthy of noting here for our key characteristics of support and resistance. So now that we've covered some of these really important concepts about support and resistance, let's go back into the market and see what that looks like in the actual chart. All right, so here we are back to our previous example, and earlier I drew this box over here and said, don't worry about that, but now we're going to take a look at that. And so let's just come on over into this area. Now, the first thing, you see that not exactly, there's a little bit of a gap here, but as price came up to this zone, which we'll talk about in later videos, we saw that price did what? Price came up to the resistance, because keep in mind we're below the level, and then dropped. And then price came back up to our resistance and then dropped. And then price came back up to our resistance, dropped, and then finally broke through and then went on to create a new resistance in the market. But what's important here to understand is that this level that we earlier identified is a support level over here. Previously, it was acting as what? It was acting as resistance. Let's get rid of these blue markings here and this arrow. So here we have our first example. What started as a resistance level then became a support level once it was breached, which is why all of these levels are called support and resistance levels. Over here, we have a resistance in the market. Let's see what happens when this level is breached. Here we go. So price breached through our resistance, came back and found support, and then went on to a new resistance. So you can see here again, yet another example of resistance turning into support. Now this is constantly going on in the markets, and if we come back over here to our main hallway, our main ceiling, our main resistance in this example, and we start to take a look, there are other support and resistances that we can look at. So for example, there was a support right here in this area. So we have a support. And then what happened, the support breached, price, you see the green candle here in the wick, came back up, and then what was previously support then acted as resistance, and we fell. So right here, we have resistance. And then note this, look what happens when price gets back up to this level. So again, we see what was once acting as support is now acting as resistance. You can see it again down here, another example. You have resistance right here. I have a resistance right here. As you can see, price came up to this point. Let's get rid of this blue line here. Price came up to this point and then dropped very hard. Now, the next time price came up, found a little bit of resistance, but ultimately it broke through. Now, when it broke through, what happened? It came back down, and now this level acted as support, and then we come back up to our next resistance. So here we have support. Now, this video was designed to give you a conceptual understanding of support and resistance, how support becomes resistance